Hi everyone, it's Karen here and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for coming back again. Today I have a new tutorial where I created a lot of cards using the Altenew Medallion double layer stencil. This is a set of 2 stencils that when layered together create a beautiful medallion pattern. The list of all the materials and product links are listed below in the description area. I'm going to start talking a little bit how these stencils work, and then I'll talk a little bit more about what my thought process was. So these stencils are 2 stencils that are supposed to be layered together. I've recently made a video with the dahlia layered stencil, which is 2 stencils that create a beautiful flower, which are also from Altenew. And I'll link that video below and above here so you can see what I mean and how I created the card. So the first thing you do is you take the stencil letter A, which is the first stencil, and I applied some ink to the background. This is the Distress Oxide ink, Twisted Citron. You can use any type of ink for this, but ink works best, especially with this stencil. I did attempt to use other products such as paint and paste and even sprays. However, because the lines between the pattern are so thin, all the wet products were running underneath my stencil. So I really needed something that will not be too wet, and ink was a perfect choice. I heat set the first layer and then I went ahead and added my second layer. I didn't want them to mix within the colors and I just wanted them to layer perfectly. That's why I heat set it. Then I took the second stencil, which is stencil letter B, and using peacock feathers from the Distress Oxide inks as well, I went ahead and added the color to my background. You have to line it up perfectly, which they line up so nicely together, and then you just start dabbing the color. I made sure that I used a blending tool, and instead of using circular motions like you usually do with the blending tool, I actually just pressed it to the background. And since I didn't want the ink to go underneath the stencil, I made sure that I just pressed it onto the background instead of moving it in circles. That way the ink applied itself perfectly. And I just love the end result. It really created a beautiful pattern for my cards. I really wanted to show you how you can use the stencil with many different products. However, instead of doing that, because I wasn't able to apply other products with it, I ended up attempting different types of patterns with the same stencils and seeing and playing and experimenting to see how it would be. So the first thing that I did is I tried to see if I could apply first the stencil B and then the stencil A and do the medallion backwards. So what I did is I took the stencil B first, and then I took the picked raspberries color from the Distress Oxide inks, and using the same method with the blending tool, I went ahead and added it to the background. Then I took stencil letter A, which is the first stencil I used before, and using seedless preserves, I added the purple color into the background. I should have probably picked 2 colors that had a little bit more contrast between them, but I still really love the way the pattern came out. It really came out beautifully. So that made me think that I want to try this pattern in many different ways, adding 3 colors, 4 colors, and many other colors just to make different colorful backgrounds. For the third background, I thought to myself, how could I incorporate 3 colors into the design? So I thought to myself that maybe the background shouldn't be white. If I colored in the background in a different color, it would create a third color in the design. So I took the Twisted Citron again and I basically blended it into the background to cover all the white. This time, since I didn't have the stencil on top of it, I could just blend it into the background very easily. I heat set the background first before adding the stencil and the next colors. Then I took the first stencil again, which is stencil A, and used the picked raspberry to add some pink color to the background. I applied the pink color the same way I had done the other ones by dabbing it onto the stencil to make sure that it doesn't lift up. I went all around the stencil and then I chose the other stencil with a different color. This time I did pick contrasting colors so it would really show the difference between the lines. I heat set this layer as well, and then I took Stencil B, and using peacock feathers distress oxide ink, I went ahead and lined it up and applied it to the background. I used the same method of pressing it just to make sure it doesn't run under the stencil, and I used a contrasting color to the green and pink to make sure that it would really show through. At this point, I was really having fun with these stencils. I kept on asking to myself, what else can I do? What else can I do? I really love how it was turning out and all the different ideas that I had in my head. So of course I had to try the same technique with the 3 colors, using the stencils the opposite way, using B first and then A. So what I did is I took Wild Honey Distress Oxide ink and I blended it into the background again like I had done before. And then I took Stencil B, and using the Seedless Preserve, I went again and dabbed it all over to make sure that I cover the Stencil B completely. Once I was done with the Seedless Preserves and the Stencil B, I went ahead and heat set it again, and then added Stencil A again and used another contrasting color. These colors were too contrasting for me, as I don't really like this combination as much. Although it turned out really nicely, I do prefer softer pastel-like combinations and more monochrome, but I really wanted to show that this looks really nicely when it's a contrast between the colors. The nice thing about the Distress Oxide inks, as you can see, you can actually see underneath them, and they're not fully translucent, but you can really see the whole dark color underneath the peacock feathers, which made it look really cool for this background. At this point, I was so excited of making all these backgrounds that I had to try something different. I wanted it to look kind of like a kaleidoscope of colors, and I took a bunch of my favorite colors from the Distress Oxide inks and started applying them in a circular motion, kind of creating a round circle on the background. I would blend one color into the next and then would go back with the previous color just to make sure that they're all blended together. Once I had the background looking like a rainbow, I had to think of how I would make this stand out. So I took some of the Black Soot Distress Oxide ink and used it to cover one of the stencils. I actually picked Stencil B, which is one of the stencils, and just applied it to the background. I just really wanted to show that you can actually use just one stencil and still get an amazing result as well. So you don't have to layer these stencils if you don't want to. You can just go ahead and use them separately as well. So in this case, I didn't use Stencil A, but I had to see how the pattern would look with the Stencil A as well. So I went ahead and I actually created the same type of card where I did that round circle with the different colored inks to create another rainbow. And this time I used the same Black Soot ink and used though the Stencil A as a background to create the pattern. I really love that no matter which stencil I used, the patterns were always really beautiful. So whether I used Stencil A with the same pattern or Stencil B, I still got a really nice result and beautiful background. I was really having so much fun that I really couldn't stop. So I went ahead and thought to myself, can I add the rainbow on top of a stencil? So I went ahead and did the same thing. I actually used the same colors and went and dabbed them in the same circular motion on my stencil. Of course, I couldn't do a circular motion. I had to just dab them onto the background because of the stencil, but they still came out really, really nice, and I really loved the result. I actually really love how it came out. It almost looked like a mandala, and I loved how it had the white in between the colors. Although I could have left it like that, I wanted to see what would happen if I added the next stencil, the opposite stencil, with the Black Soot and added on top. And that also created a really nice background. It was a little bit more intricate than the other one, and it still looked really beautiful. For this background, I did the exact same thing, but instead of adding the Black Soot on the second stencil, I actually added darker colors. So I went ahead and did the same thing where I started adding the colors in circular motion around my stencil. I took stencil A first and did the same thing of adding all the colors around. This looked just as beautiful on its own with the white background, but I wanted to see what would happen if I added darker colors on top with the opposite stencil. So I grabbed some darker colors of the same Distress Oxide inks, which are the Candied Apple, Faded Jeans, Lucky Clover, and Wilted Violet. These are a little bit darker than the other Distress Oxide inks, so when I would add the other stencil, they would create a nice contrast between the lighter colors. So I went and added the Candied Apple in the center and the Wilted Violet on top of the purplish pink color, and then I added the Faded Jeans on top of the Peacock Feathers and the Lucky Clover at the end on top of the Twisted Citron. This created a really nice contrast between them, and it created a really colorful background that really looked like a kaleidoscope. I truly love those white backgrounds with the rainbow effect so much that I really had to go back and make some of those backgrounds as well. So I went back and just quickly added the same colors in a circular motion on top of the stencil A to create that really nice rainbow effect. I did not add stencil B on this one. I just went ahead and just created that really nice rainbow colors in the circular motion. Of course, I had to do this with the B stencil as well, so I did the exact same thing, just added my B stencil and then created that same rainbow effect with the B stencil. Now it was time to assemble my cards, but I knew that I didn't want anything too busy to go on top of the backgrounds because the backgrounds were so beautiful on their own and they were so intricate in design that I really wanted to have something very simple on top just to make sure that you can really see the design. So I took two dies from Altenew. This is the Thanks and the Happy die, and I cut 5 of each of the words because I had made 10 backgrounds. Then I used my Versamark ink to press it on top of each of the words and then dipped it inside my super fine black embossing powder from Ranger. That's basically the only black embossing powder I had. You can really use any type of black embossing powder. It doesn't have to be super fine, but that's the one I had. And I actually dipped each of the words twice inside the powder because I really wanted to make them stand out. Of course, I heat set the embossing powder between each application because I wanted it to really be thick enamel on top of the words. Once I glued them all onto the background, and I used my art glitter glue to do this, I went ahead and stamped a word underneath the word happy. This is from the Happy stamp set that comes with the die, and although I could leave the word thanks on its own, the word happy really needed something underneath, something like birthday or anniversary. This stamp set comes with a lot of different sayings and sentiments that you can add underneath or on top of the word happy. So this was really easy to do. I stamped and embossed the word birthday with the same Versamark ink and the black embossing powder, and then heat set them. Finally, I went ahead and added some Nouveau drops in black just to add a little bit of an extra detail to the card backgrounds. I don't know if you can tell, but you can see how much fun I had creating these backgrounds. You know how much I love creating backgrounds, and this was no exception. And they turned out so nice. I loved creating these cards. I really, really did. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked my video, please give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. For more inspiration, subscribe to my channel and visit me on my website. Bye!